Okay, come in, close the door, sit all the way down, put your phone face down on the table, because tonight is not a rumor night, tonight is not a vibe night, tonight is a paperwork night, and paperwork nights are the loudest nights we do on this channel. Because right now, as we are sitting here breathing, there is a family attorney in the city of New York whose office contains a drawer, and inside that drawer sits a stack of documents with Papoose's name printed at the top of every single page. And the ink on those documents is 14 months old. 14 months. Not 14 days. Not 14 weeks. 14 months of a marriage that has been publicly described as oversitting inside a private drawer that no one has been allowed to open. And that is not the story anybody has been telling you. Everybody has been telling you the story on top of the story. The interviews. The rebrand. The soft launches. The tabloid photos on the Brooklyn stoop. The Claressa Shields angle. That is the story on top. That is the show. That is the smoke. The actual story. The one with a case number. The one with a signature line. The one with financial exposure attached to it. That story has not been told yet. And the reason it has not been told is because the story on top has been engineered specifically to keep you from asking about the story underneath. And when I show you the dates on this thing, I promise you, you are going to understand why. Because the dates are the entire architecture. The dates are the crime scene. The dates are the moment where Shaka's mama, a boxing champion, a fan base, a daughter, and about 24 separate legal instruments all collide in a way nobody in Papoose's press circle wants you to look at. And when I tell you the beneficiaries have not been touched, when I tell you the deed has not been severed, when I tell you that not a single one of the documents that closes a real marriage has been executed, I need you to understand we are not talking about laziness. We are not talking about grief. We are talking about a decision that has been made every single morning for 14 straight months, and I am about to walk you through why that decision is one of the loudest confessions in modern hip-hop, and why by the time we get to the deed section. And I promise you, we are getting to the deed section. You are going to understand that everything you thought you were watching was the exact thing you were supposed to be watching, and nothing you actually needed to see. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Now let me set the table for you properly, because before we can even start swinging on these dates, I need everybody in this room to be looking at the same board. Papoose, whose government name is Shamil Mackey, and Remy Ma, whose government name is Reminisce Smith Mackey. Because yes, that hyphenated last name is going to matter more than you think in about 8 minutes, have been legally married since 2008. That is a 2008 wedding. That is a marriage that has been on paper for the better part of 2 decades. That is not a fling. That is not a situationship. That is not a rap couple photo shoot at the Grammys. That is a legally documented union with a joint deed, joint children, joint business exposure, joint tax filings, joint publishing conversations, and joint public identity. Remy Ma is not just his wife on Instagram. Remy Ma is his wife on the mortgage. Remy Ma is his wife on the life insurance policy. Remy Ma is his wife on the healthcare proxy. Remy Ma is his wife in the way that a bank recognizes marriage, which is the only definition of marriage that ultimately matters when the paperwork starts moving. And their daughter, little Reminisce Mackey, the child everyone knows as Reminisce, is a minor, which means every legal decision the two of them make from this point forward is not just about them. It is about a family court judge somewhere looking at what conduct they exhibited during the pendency of the separation. And I need you to write that phrase down, pendency of the separation. Because that phrase is going to come back around, and when it does, it is going to explain why the last 14 months of Papoose's press cycle are not just embarrassing, they are potentially catastrophic for him. The public version of this story, the version you have been watching on your For You page, is that this marriage is done. Papoose said it is done. The rumor mill said it is done. The tabloid pictures with Claressa Shields, the Olympic gold medalist boxer, said it is done. Every interview Papoose has done for the last calendar year has been framed around a chapter closing, a new life beginning, a man moving forward. That is what you have been sold. That is the product. That is the merch. But merch is not paperwork. Merch is not a deed. Merch is not a re-executed will. And the stakes here, musically, culturally, financially, and reputationally, are not small stakes. Musically, Papoose has been positioning himself as a solo artist unshackled, ready to release, ready to tour, ready to be seen as his own man. Culturally, hip-hop has been watching one of its most public marriages get dismantled in real time, and the fanbase has been asked to pick a team. Financially, we are talking about 2 decades of commingled assets, publishing catalogs, touring income, and endorsement money, and every single dollar of that is on the table depending on how a court eventually classifies this separation. And reputationally, Papoose has spent the last 14 months building a narrative of the honorable man who did his time, held down the family, and is now finally free to live for himself. That is the story he is selling. Except, and here is the tension that is going to drive everything else in this video, the paperwork does not say any of that. The paperwork says the exact opposite. And when the paperwork says one thing and the man says another thing, one of those 2 things is lying. So which one is it? Because from where I am sitting, only one of those 2 has a notary stamp on it, and it is not the interview. Let me start with the surface, because the surface is where you can see this with your own eyes if you know where to look. Piece of evidence number 1, the interviews. If you go back through Papoose's press cycle over the last 14 months, you will find a very consistent pattern of language. He talks about this chapter. He talks about moving forward. He talks about being a man who did what he had to do. He talks about the marriage in the past tense. Every single interview, whether it is a podcast sit-down, a radio drop-in, a red carpet moment, or a video freestyle, the framing is identical. And the framing is identical because the framing is scripted. When language is that disciplined across that many appearances, it is not organic, it is messaging. That is the first piece. Piece of evidence number 2, the Claressa Shields situation. Claressa Shields, the 2-time Olympic gold medalist and one of the most decorated boxers in American history, has been photographed and reported in connection with Papoose on more than one occasion. There has been social media flirtation. There have been dinner sightings. There have been the kind of paparazzi photos that do not happen by accident when both parties are aware of a camera. Now understand, a soft launch is not a coincidence. A soft launch is a marketing decision. When a public figure allows themselves to be photographed with a new romantic interest, that photograph exists because somebody wanted it to exist. And that photograph is doing a job. The job of that photograph is to normalize a new pairing in the public imagination before any legal reality catches up to it. Piece of evidence number 3, the disappearance of joint appearances. Papoose and Remy Ma used to be one of those couples who showed up together to everything. Award shows, red carpets, BET Hip Hop Awards, family events, Instagram takeovers. Over the last 14 months, that joint public presence has been surgically dismantled. They are not seen together. They are not photographed together. They are not on each other's social media in the way they used to be. That is not accidental erosion. That is deliberate curation. When 2 people who used to appear together stop appearing together, and one of them starts appearing with somebody new, the public reads that as separation whether the paperwork has caught up or not. Piece of evidence number 4, the tone from Remy's camp. Remy Ma has been notably quieter about this than anyone expected her to be. And I want you to sit with that. This is a woman who built a career on being the loudest, sharpest, most unflinching voice in any room she walks into. This is a woman who does not swallow slights. This is a woman who does not let anybody speak on her from a distance without a response. And her camp, her actual camp, not just her Instagram, has been strategically, deliberately, and I would argue professionally quiet. That is not weakness. That is not confusion. That is legal advice. When your lawyer tells you to be quiet during a matrimonial dispute, you get quiet because everything you say publicly can and will be used inside a discovery motion. And Remy Ma being quiet in the loudest possible way tells me that Remy Ma's team is playing chess on a board that Papoose's press cycle does not even know exists. So already, on the surface, we have a man telling the world one story with his mouth while every visible signal around him is being carefully curated to sell that story, and none of it, has produced a single filed piece of paper. And that is just what you can see from the outside. Wait until I show you what is happening on the inside. And oh, do I have more for you? Because if you thought the surface was interesting, we have not even opened the drawer yet. The stands, and by the stands I mean the people in Papoose's comment section who have already made up their minds that this man is free, single, and vindicated. The stands are really not going to like this next section. Because the next section is where the cultural evidence starts landing, and the cultural evidence is what separates a rumor from a receipt. I am about to walk you through what people close to this situation have been quietly saying in rooms that Papoose's PR team does not have access to. And when we get to the deed conversation, and I promise you we are getting to the deed conversation before this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why the 14-month clock is the single most damning piece of evidence in this entire dossier. So let's step into the cultural layer, because this is where the story stops being about what Papoose said and starts being about what everybody around Papoose has not said. Cultural evidence piece number 1. The industry silence around Remy Ma. Remy Ma has a Rolodex. Remy Ma has friends. Remy Ma has co-signers who have historically shown up loudly and publicly whenever her name has been in a headline. And the deafening silence from that Rolodex over the last 14 months is, in itself, a piece of evidence. Because when the industry goes quiet around a woman in the middle of a matrimonial situation, it usually means one of two things. Either the industry does not want to pick sides against her husband, or the industry knows something the public does not know and is refusing to comment because commenting would trigger consequences they are not ready to absorb. Either interpretation is bad for Papoose. Cultural evidence piece number 2, the podcast circuit response. If you have been paying attention to the hip-hop podcast ecosystem over the last year, and I know a lot of you have, you will have noticed that hosts who normally have Papoose on speed dial have been strangely reluctant to press him on the marriage question directly. He gets softball questions. He gets gentle reframes. He gets the courtesy of a smooth transition whenever the topic gets uncomfortable. And that is not because those hosts do not know what to ask. That is because those hosts have been told, either directly or through their bookers, what the boundaries are. When a subject controls the framing of every interview they sit for, that subject is not just a guest, that subject is running a campaign. And a campaign, by definition, has an objective it is trying to achieve. Cultural evidence piece number 3, the Claressa Shields signaling. Claressa Shields is one of the sharpest athletes in the world. She did not stumble into this narrative. When Claressa has been asked about the situation publicly, her language has been careful. Her language has been coached. Her language has been the language of a person who has been briefed that whatever version of reality she has been told about Papoose's marital status is the version she is expected to reflect back to the cameras. And I have said it before on this channel, and I will say it again, when the third party in a triangle is speaking in language that sounds like it was written by a publicist, the third party is not the person driving the narrative. The third party is the person carrying the narrative on somebody else's behalf. Cultural evidence piece number 4. The neighborhood reaction. Because Brooklyn talks. Brooklyn does not do subtle. And the community that has known Papoose and Remy Ma for the entirety of their public relationship has been sending a very specific signal for the last year, and that signal is that nobody in that community is treating this marriage as over. The block does not treat him as a single man. The block does not treat her as an ex-wife. The block is still watching this like it is an ongoing situation because the block, unlike the internet, has line of sight into who actually walks in and out of that house. And the block has been telling anybody who will listen that the coming and going pattern at that house does not look like a broken marriage. It looks like a marriage that is being publicly performed as broken while privately continuing to function. Cultural evidence piece number 5, and this is where somebody in the comments is about to try to argue with me, so let me preempt you. Somebody is going to say, hey, maybe they are just co-parenting responsibly, maybe they are just handling the transition maturely, maybe the neighborhood is misreading normal parental exchanges as something more. And listen, I hear you. I have heard that argument. And I want to give it its full weight before I dismantle it. Because in theory, yes, two adults ending a marriage can absolutely maintain a functional co-parenting rhythm without it meaning the marriage is still on. That is a real thing. Grown people do that. But, and this is where the theory falls apart, grown people who are functionally co-parenting through a real separation do the paperwork alongside the co-parenting. They file the petition and they co-parent. They sever the deed and they co-parent. They update the beneficiaries and they co-parent. The paperwork and the parenting are not mutually exclusive. They happen in parallel. What does not happen in a real separation is 14 months of parenting with zero paperwork. That combination is not co-parenting. That combination is a marriage. And the reason I am confident saying that is because that is not my opinion. That is how every family court judge in this country reads a fact pattern. Which is the perfect setup for what I need to show you next, because we are done with the surface, and we are done with the culture, and now we have to go all the way underneath, into the actual business of what a divorce looks like when a real one is happening. Because this is where the entire narrative Papoose has been selling for 14 months completely collapses. So take a breath. Because we are shifting gears now. We are leaving the entertainment side of this conversation and we are walking into the industry side of this conversation, and I need you locked in for the next 10 minutes because this is the section that separates commentary from analysis. When a marriage of this length ends, and I mean legally ends, not press ends, not Instagram ends, but ends in the eyes of the state of New York, which is one of the most demanding matrimonial jurisdictions in the entire country. You are not signing one document. You are signing an architecture. You are signing anywhere from 12 to 24 separate legal instruments, depending on the complexity of the marital estate. And in a marriage that has run for the better part of 2 decades, involves a minor child, involves commingled career earnings, involves publishing rights, involves touring revenue, involves a jointly deeded property, involves shared retirement designations, involves shared healthcare directives, and involves shared estate planning, you are on the high end of that range. You are looking at a stack of paperwork that takes a full week of appointments with a fountain pen in your hand to execute properly. That is what closing a real marriage looks like. And here is where I need to walk you through the 3 separate systemic angles that all lead to the same conclusion, because it is not just one damning fact, it is 3 interconnected structural realities. And together they form a case that no family court judge in the state of New York would be able to ignore. Systemic angle number 1, the drawer. Because approximately 14 months ago, a family attorney in New York reportedly drafted the initial separation package for Papoose. That package was reviewed. That package was cleaned up. That package was ready. That package is sitting right now in a drawer, waiting for a phone call from Papoose that would say the 4 words a matrimonial attorney needs to hear before anything happens. Go ahead and file. That phone call has never come. 14 months of that phone call not coming. And I need you to understand what that means in the practice of matrimonial law, because in that specific industry, a client sitting on a drafted separation package for more than 60 days is already unusual. 90 days is a red flag. 180 days is a story. 14 months is a decision. That is not a man who is thinking about it. That is a man who has actively chosen, every single day for 14 straight months, not to make the phone call that would end this. And in matrimonial law, that pattern of conduct is called intentional non-filing. And it is one of the exact fact patterns that judges use to determine whether the parties had a genuine intention to dissolve or whether one party was strategically maintaining marital status for reasons unrelated to the marriage itself. Systemic angle number 2, the beneficiaries. And this is the one that I want everybody to lean in for, because this is the part of the story that almost nobody on TikTok is going to explain to you correctly. When a real divorce is unfolding, the beneficiary rewrite is one of the first things that happens. Not the last. The first. Within 30 to 60 days of a genuine separation, the life insurance policy gets updated. The retirement designation gets updated. The will gets re-executed. The healthcare proxy gets redesignated. The bank signatory sheet gets rewritten. Because no adult on the planet who is genuinely ending a marriage wants their soon-to-be ex to inherit their existence if something happens to them on a Tuesday. That is not opinion. That is family law 101. And based on what has been reported and what the paperwork side of this story looks like, none of those documents have been touched. The life insurance policy is reportedly still keyed to Remy Ma. The retirement designation is reportedly still keyed to Remy Ma. The will has reportedly not been re-executed. The healthcare directive still reportedly lists Remy Ma as the primary point of contact if Papoose cannot make his own medical decisions. That is not administrative drift. That is not a man who has been too busy. That is a man who has, on every single document that governs what happens to his money and his body, kept his wife in the position of primary partner. And that is not commentary. That is the paperwork. Systemic angle number 3, the deed. Because everything else in this story is theoretical until you get to the deed, and the deed is where the whole thing collapses. That house, the one that has been photographed, the one Papoose has been seen walking into carrying his daughter, the one the tabloids will not stop circling, is reportedly deeded jointly. Both names. Both signatures. Full tenants by the entirety in a state that treats that designation like concrete. And in the 14-month window we are talking about, there has been no motion filed to sever the deed. No refinance initiated to remove one spouse. No quitclaim signed. No notice sent to the mortgage servicer that the marital status of the borrowers has changed. Nothing. And I want you to understand what that means in the culture of high-profile divorces, because in that specific ecosystem, the deed is where money lives. And money, I have said this on this channel 100 times, money does not lie. Press lies. Interviews lie. Instagram captions lie. Deeds do not lie. Deeds are the single most honest document in any marriage, because deeds are what a bank looks at, and banks do not care about your press cycle. And the deed on that house is saying, in the only language a court cares about, that Papoose is still married in every meaningful way. And when you stack these three systemic angles on top of each other, the drawer, the beneficiaries, and the deed, what you are looking at is not a man ending a marriage. What you are looking at is a man who has structurally, deliberately, and consistently maintained the legal architecture of his marriage for 14 straight months, while telling the public a completely different story. And that gap between the legal reality and the public performance is the entire crime of this thing. That is the story underneath the story. That is what nobody in his press cycle wants you to look at. That is what the interviews are designed to distract you from. Because the moment you see the paperwork, the interviews stop making sense. Now here comes the reveal, and I need you to sit with this one, because this is where the entire 14 months of press comes apart at the seams. The truth is this: Papoose is not ending a marriage. Papoose is managing one. And I want everybody in this room to sit with the difference between those two words, because those two words are the entire story. Ending a marriage is a legal event. Managing a marriage is a strategy. Ending a marriage has a courthouse in it. Managing a marriage has a press team in it. Ending a marriage produces filed documents. Managing a marriage produces narrative documents. And what we have been watching for the last 14 months has been, in every measurable way, the second thing and not the first thing. This is a man who has reportedly assembled all of the legal materials required to end his marriage and has then, with what I can only describe as extraordinary discipline, chosen not to use them. That is not indecision. That is not confusion. That is not grief. That is a plan. And a plan of that length, of that patience, of that precision, is not a man who is heartbroken. That is a man who is waiting. And what he is waiting for, that is the part that we have to be honest about. Because in matrimonial law, when a client sits on a drafted separation package for this long, there are only 3 explanations, and only 3. The first is cold feet, and I have already told you why I do not believe that is what we are looking at, because a man with cold feet does not run a 14-month press campaign against his own marriage. The second is a triggering event, a contract closing, a tour advance, a record deal cycle, a tax year rolling over, where the timing of the filing has been engineered to occur after some external financial event lands. And the third, and this is the ugly one, the one that nobody in his camp wants me to say out loud on camera, so I am not going to say it explicitly, but I am going to describe it precisely, is the strategic weaponization of marital ambiguity for the benefit of a parallel relationship or a parallel arrangement in which the ambiguity itself is the leverage. That is the menu. Those are the 3 options. And based on everything I have walked you through tonight, only one of those 3 explanations fits the fact pattern. And I do not have to tell you which one. You already know which one. And the reason this reveal matters, the reason it is not just gossip, the reason it is not just a hip-hop rumor, the reason it is potentially catastrophic, is because a court that eventually looks at this fact pattern is going to see the same thing you are seeing. A court is going to see 14 months of maintained joint deed, maintained joint beneficiaries, maintained joint healthcare proxy, maintained joint estate plan, maintained joint residence, maintained co-parenting under one roof, and a public press campaign that contradicts every single one of those legal realities. And a court is going to have to make a determination about whether this couple was actually separated during those 14 months in any legally meaningful sense, or whether the separation was, and I quote from the way judges tend to phrase this, constructed for tactical purposes after the fact. And that determination has enormous financial consequences. Enormous. Because a lot of what has been earned during those 14 months, touring income, appearance fees, endorsement deals, branding money, potentially even ancillary income tied to the very press cycle we are analyzing right now, could very well be classified as marital property. And that classification is not a small conversation. That classification is potentially a 9-figure conversation. And that is the part of this that Papoose's press team has not prepared him for, because you cannot press her your way out of an equitable distribution analysis. You cannot Instagram your way out of a discovery motion. You cannot podcast your way out of a judge who is reading the deed. The paperwork will hold. The paperwork always holds. And that is the reveal. That is the truth bomb. Papoose has spent 14 months building a public narrative that the actual legal record actively contradicts, and when those 2 records eventually collide in a courtroom, the legal record is going to win. Because the legal record always wins. But here is the thing I want to leave you with in this final stretch, because we did not do all of this walking through the drawer and the deed and the beneficiaries just to feel bad about it. We did all of this walking because the person with the integrity in this story is still winning. Remy Ma has said almost nothing. Remy Ma has not begged for public sympathy. Remy Ma has not run a counterpress campaign. Remy Ma has not gone on the podcasts and cried and asked for the fanbase to pick her side. Remy Ma has done what disciplined, grown people do when they are being tested. She has stayed quiet, she has stayed strategic, and she has let the paperwork on her side of the table do the talking for her. And that quiet is not weakness. That quiet is not defeat. That quiet is a woman whose legal team is in a position of extraordinary strength, and the reason her legal team is in a position of extraordinary strength is precisely because of everything Papoose has failed to do over the last 14 months. Every single day that Papoose has spent running interviews instead of updating beneficiaries, Remy Ma's position has gotten stronger. Every single day he has spent staging Brooklyn tabloid moments instead of severing the deed, her position has gotten stronger. Every single day he has spent posting up next to a boxing champion instead of executing a will, her position has gotten stronger. That is the thing about integrity in matrimonial law. Integrity is not just a moral position, integrity is a legal position. When you conduct yourself consistently with what the paperwork says, the paperwork protects you. When you conduct yourself in contradiction with what the paperwork says, the paperwork indicts you. And that is why the person doing every job to 100%, the person who is unfazed, the person who is still winning without even being outside, that is Remy Ma. One person made a press cycle. The other person made a paperwork trail. Only one of those two things holds up in front of a judge. And the little girl in the middle of all of this, reminisce, she is going to grow up. And she is going to look back at this moment in her family's history. And she is going to see two adults who took very different approaches to a very difficult chapter. And she is going to see a father who spent 14 months managing a narrative and a mother who spent 14 months protecting an estate. And I know which one of those two she is going to see as the parent who is actually looking out for her. Because kids figure it out. Kids always figure it out. The paperwork becomes their inheritance in more ways than one. It becomes their financial inheritance, yes, but it also becomes their emotional inheritance, their sense of who showed up and who performed, who was disciplined and who was distracted. And that inheritance is being written right now, one unsigned document at a time, one unupdated beneficiary at a time, one unsevered deed at a time. And when the ledger is finally opened, and it will be opened, that is not a question, that is a matter of when, the record is going to show that the person with the discipline was the person who won this, quietly, methodically, without ever raising her voice. That is what integrity looks like in a matrimonial fight. That is what winning without being outside looks like. And that is why, when the dust finally settles, the culture is going to look back at this 14-month window and understand that the person who was supposedly losing was, the entire time, the only person actually in position. And this is only the start. Because part 3 of this dossier is where we follow the money. And part 3 is where things get really uncomfortable for a specific set of people in Papoose's orbit who have been quietly benefiting from these 14 months of ambiguity without ever having their names attached to it on camera. Part 3 is where we open the ledger. Part 3 is where we ask 2 specific questions that nobody in his press cycle has been willing to ask out loud. Question 1. Whose bank account has actually benefited from these 14 months of unfiled paperwork? And what specific financial events were reportedly scheduled to close during this exact window that would explain the timing of the delay? And question 2, who inside his professional team has been advising him to maintain this ambiguity, and what is their financial incentive for the marriage remaining legally intact while publicly appearing dissolved? Those 2 questions are the ledger. Those 2 questions are the part 3 that is coming. If you thought the dates were criminal, wait until you see the numbers, because the numbers are where this stops being a hip-hop story and starts being a business story. So if you rocked with this breakdown tonight, tap that like button so the algorithm sends this to more people who need to hear the paperwork version of this story instead of the press version. Hit subscribe if you are not already family, because you do not want to miss part 3, and you especially do not want to miss the next video I am dropping, because the next one is about a completely different situation involving one of the biggest names in the culture, and it is a situation where a superstar just walked into what looked like the biggest win of his career. And what nobody is telling you is that the room he walked into was designed by 3 people who needed him to think it was a win so they could quietly finish something they started 2 years ago without him noticing. The receipts on that one are wild. The names on that one are wilder. And when I show you the timeline on that one, you're going to understand why the biggest moments in this culture are almost never what they look like on the surface. I will see you in the next one. Take care of each other. Keep your paperwork updated. And never, and I mean never, trust a press cycle over a filed document.